self-care, self-help, diets, exercise, fitness. I mean, have you scrolled Instagram? Have you scrolled TikTok? Have you scrolled Facebook? Have you scrolled YouTube? There is more emphasis today on getting well, getting help, getting strong, getting care than any time in the history of the world, and people in the US are miserable. All we need is wisdom. Stay with me and I'll tell you why. So wisdom isn't knowledge. Wisdom isn't being smart. Wisdom isn't facts. Wisdom isn't knowing a lot of stuff. You could be a brain surgeon and not have wisdom. You could be somebody like Jeffrey Epstein, very wealthy, very rich, very shrewd, and not have wisdom. Perhaps some of our recent political leaders have not had wisdom. I'm sure that many of them don't. Wisdom is not having a college degree. Wisdom is not being able to recite facts. Wisdom is not intuition. Wisdom is not having a high EQ, emotional IQ. Wisdom is not being clever. There are clever thieves. There are clever people that make pillows that nobody would necessarily call wise. We could be clever at carving wood. We could be clever at fly fishing. We could be clever at making money, but none of those things are wisdom. And today you can get books or apps or podcasts, even on how to, there's like a book about how to sound smart at a party. Like this is a thing. Like I heard a few years ago that nerdiness is the new sexiness or something like that. So it's actually becoming fashionable to show up at a cocktail party and drop, Boethius's name. And then people, are impressed and say, oh, well, who's that? And you say, oh, it's a 5th century sage thinker. All of these things, being physically fit, being clever, being smart, having formal education, are all goods, but they are not wisdom. Plato said we have 3 appetites of the soul. Appetite just means we get hungry for 3 things, or thirsty for 3 things. At the end of the day, we get hungry and thirsty for physical pleasure. Nothing wrong with it. Aristotle said it's actually necessary for a flourishing life, but it can't be the end. Aristotle wasn't a hedonist, but we like good food. We like good drinks. We like to relax on the couch. We like to go on vacation. We love sex. We love comfort. We are right now, like I'm shifting around in my chair to get more comfortable. A lot of times we are wanting to increase our physical pleasure and we're not even aware of it. So if you just took a journal of what you did all day long, much of it is going to be, I went to the water cooler and I got some water and then I walked into the room and I laid down for a while and I scrolled Instagram. So number 1, we have an appetite for pleasure. Number 2, we have an appetite for status, for impressing people. That's what likes on social media are all about. That's what designer clothing, designer handbags, German cars are all about. We love, and again, I fall prey to this, so don't think that I'm in some other league. We like status. We live in a world consumed with facade, not so much what's on the inside, but what's on the outside. We like to impress people, whatever pocket we might be in. We could be in rodeo, so we want to have the right saddle. We could be in scuba diving, and we have the XYZ, Rolex watch that can go down 2 miles. But whatever, we like status. So that was number 2, reputation and status. Number 3 is we have an appetite for knowledge or wisdom. We want to know. We do. We're curious. As young children, the most common question children ask their parents when they can talk is why? 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 It's bred into us. It's innate. We want to know. We want to understand. The big problem, of course, is that our quest for physical pleasure, our quest for reputation, honors, and status get in the way or oftentimes encumber, take away from time that we spend or should be spending getting wise. I mean, how many of us say, I waste so much time on social media? I waste so much time watching TV. I wasted so much time, blah, 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 blah. One of the greatest barriers to attaining wisdom is having to say no to physical pleasure and say no to responsibility. Subscribe, if you will, once again, to this channel. I'd really, really appreciate it. Okay, so what is it? I'm going to quickly go through what it is, and then I'm going to go through some really, really practical ways on how you can tweak your life a bit. Tweak your life a bit, make a few little changes, and become wise, or wiser, or a sage, or a god. I mean that metaphorically speaking, but it's possible. So number one, love, 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 love. Think of the word love. Think of Misty Copeland. Think of Simone Biles. Think of Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant. Kobe Bryant's a good example. Think of somebody who so commits himself or herself to his or her art or science or whatever. That commitment is out of love, right? Love is suffering. Love is giving up things for the sake of something else. So, number one, philosophy, something I'm passionate about, as you know, simply means, as a compound of two Greek words, philo, which means love, and sophia, which means wisdom. So a philosopher is somebody who actually loves wisdom, not facts, not success, not being clever, not being able to figure out how to manipulate or maneuver, or it's wisdom. It's somebody who actually loves it. And when we love something, we say yes to it a lot, and we say no to other things. So number one, wisdom is love. It requires love. Number two, wisdom is reflective. So most of our day goes on and we're an autopilot. We wake up, we take a shower, we brush our teeth. We're not deliberating most of the time. A lot of times we're going through the motion. It's okay, it's good that we're not deliberating about every single thing we do. We shave our legs, we shave our face, we wash our face, we make our coffee, we get in the car, we start the car. Sometimes we get to work without even like, how did I get here? I've been thinking in my head. We do a lot of things on autopilot, which is great and which is important, but we also do a lot of things on autopilot that we should not be doing on autopilot. So wisdom requires being reflective, reflecting on issues and matters of great importance, like relationships with our loved ones, like relationships with those we work with, like how we're going to allocate our time, like how we are going to, whether we're going to show up to a party or not, who we're going to affiliate with, whether we're going to comment on that social media post or not, how much of our income we're going to put away to savings. So we want to be an autopilot on many things because we don't want to sit there and deliberate about every single action, but we don't want to be on autopilot on many of the most important things in life. So wisdom requires a great deal of being reflective versus just being kind of knee-jerk and whimsical in our decision making. And finally, wisdom is critical. Wisdom is not, many people like to say, well, philosophers like to count how many angels could dance on the head of a needle. True, in certain circumstances. In fact, I'm going to talk later about, this is a famous work, Naming and Necessity, by Kripke. And that's essentially what Kripke does and many other analytic philosophers. But wisdom requires action. You can't be wise and have the wisdom of the gods, but not act on what you know to be true. And so number one, wisdom requires love. Number two, wisdom requires being reflective about things that matter. And number three, wisdom is critical. It requires action. It requires following through. It's not merely doing math problems. It's doing math problems and then putting those problems into action. But my favorite commercial of all time is the Apple Misfits commercial. Steve Jobs finds these exemplars of genius, and he shows remarkable footage of these individuals, and billboards went up around the country. Every one of these individuals were so devoted to their art, to their craft, that they spent their whole life on it. And that's what wisdom is. But the craft is life. The craft is self and introspection and understanding. It requires humility. Perhaps the most famous line, or the second most famous line of Socrates, his most famous line is, "The unexamined life is not worth living." His second most famous line is, "The only true wisdom is in knowing that you know nothing." This is so crucial. I mean, I feel presumptuous in making this video, as if like, Paul, who are you to make a video about being wise? Are you Solomon? No, I'm not. I'm telling you what I've learned, but in no way do I aspire to presenting myself as someone who is some wise sage. I know nothing. And the more I study and the more I read and the more I do life, and the more I engage in this love and this passion of learning and knowing, the more I realize I know nothing. Think of somebody who's really opinionated and not that smart, right? We know them, blowhards. That is the opposite of a wise person. It's in Proverbs, it's called a fool, but it's someone that just spouts off. They spout off opinions, they spout off whatever comes to their mind. They're loud, they're blowhards, they're opinionated. That is different because in that person, I won't name any names, there is a lack of humility. Wisdom requires humility. We will never know much about anything, anybody, ever. So wisdom requires humility. Number 3, and don't forget to subscribe or like this video. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Plug, plug, plug. Wisdom doesn't end. You don't graduate from college or with your master's degree or your PhD and say, well, I've done my schooling now, and now I'm going to get on with life. Too many people do that. And unfortunately, our education system is set up to treat education as a means to an end, which it never should be. Einstein said, wisdom is not a product of schooling, but of the lifelong attempt to acquire it. It is a lifelong commitment to turning off the damn TV, to shutting off the damn Instagram or whatever social media platform, and saying yes to, I'm going to talk about it in a bit, but something very practical that we have to do to be wise. Wisdom is not a product of schooling, but of the lifelong attempt to acquiring it. To be wise means you never get there. It never ends. Number 4, wisdom requires the capacity, which is so difficult, to suspend judgment. There was a school 2,000 years ago called the School of the Skeptics. There were 2 schools, the Ancients, the Pyrrhonians. But basically, they had this rule that they would apply to themselves of suspending judgment. I don't have to weigh in and say yes or no, this is true or this is false. And in a world of posts and information coming at us from every angle, we're forced many times to agree or disagree. We need to understand that we might be wrong. We might be wrong about the thing that we're most passionate about. I'm a Christian by faith, but I'm not a Christian because I know Christianity's true, right? I could be wrong. I could be wrong about a lot of things. And so wisdom requires an ability to suspend judgment. Aristotle said, it is the mark of an educated mind. He did not mean college education. It is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it. How many of us do that? How embedded is that axiom, that way of living in today's culture? Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure. We need to learn to suspend judgment. And along those lines, Einstein said, it is not that I'm so smart, I love this, but I stay with the questions much longer. It is so we don't want to work. It's too hard instead of hearing about how the vaccines are a ploy of Bill Gates to inject a chip into our arm. I'm going to use this because a lot of people believe this. It's much more difficult to understand the way the Centers for Disease Control, the way the National Institutes of Health, the way the World Health Organization, the way the American Medical Association. I use this example often because when one understands how these guilds of science govern themselves, it's a little bit more difficult to just come up with some idea that is not only unfounded, unverified, without evidence. But when we go deeper and say, that people are saying that in my silo that I live in, but I'm actually going to understand how these guilds of science actually govern themselves and how they interface with the pharmaceutical industry. That takes work. You'd have to have to Google National Institutes of Health, and then you'd have to dig in. You might have to read some scientific papers, right? That takes a lot of work. It's much easier to read something on some website. We need to work. Einstein said, it's not that I'm so smart, I just stay with some of these questions much longer. Last but not least, you have to be able to walk into the supermarket or the store or market and be able to tell the difference between an organic banana and a bag of Cheetos or a bag of Hostess, the little white powdery donuts that I love. I don't eat them very often, but the difference between that and organic steel-cut oatmeal. What we ingest in our minds through our ears and our eyes, the information we take in, is no different than the crap we could eat or the healthy food that we could eat. And I'm afraid the entertainment industry, I'm not bagging on them. They're in the business of making money. So are the news channels. They just want you to stay watching their stuff. We need to be more discerning. You can't be wise until you can like cut through the difference between crap and things that are healthy, and that requires reading. There's reading. There is no way around this unless you read. Some of you listen to books on tape. Great. That's not reading. That's taking in information. A lot of you like to listen to podcasts, watch videos like this. That's great. This is not reading. To be wise requires reading. You have to read, not a Kindle. I mean, you could read a Kindle, I guess. I have a Kindle. When I travel, it makes it easier. But I'm talking about getting a book and a classic that's changed. It's changed the way it's changed the education system, this book. It's changed the way we think of pedagogy, of education, of nations, of states, of goodness. And you have to read it so much that it starts falling apart. That's what's required to be wise. It takes work. I said it earlier. We have to find the classics, the perennials of history, the works that have changed civilization. They don't all have to be philosophy books. They could most certainly be books in literature. But reading Plato, and Plato's very accessible. Over the Republic, I would recommend the Five Dialogues, also falling apart. But there's no way around it. There's no way to be wise if you're not going to be a reader. Some of you might not like this because you don't like to read. That's like someone who never exercises, and I really don't like to exercise. Well, yeah, I know. When you never exercise, it's difficult to go do a half K. My daughter's doing a marathon on Sunday. It's really difficult to love working out when you never work out. It is the exact same parallel. The more we work out our brain, the more we work out our mind, the more we stick with hard problems and read them, the stronger our brain gets and the more discerning we become. But we have to be able to filter through all of the books, the thousands of books that are released each year. Maybe they'll be around in 100 years or 2,000 years, but chances are they won't. We come to love anything, our dog, our cat, our workout, our significant other, by investing in it. That's how we come to love things. The more we invest in it, the more we come to love it. Pet, car, child, job, money, significant other. But in loving wisdom, you get success thrown in as well. Okay, so when it comes to what should I read, couple things first. I absolutely believe that you have to engage with paper books. This is debatable. Some people will disagree with me, but it's when we have a book made of paper and we're allowed to write in the columns and underline things. I believe something differently is happening to our brain. Like I said earlier, we could listen to books, we could watch videos, we could read on a Kindle, but there's something about the paper, there's something about the texture, there's something about being able to have quick reference. And so I highly recommend purchasing paper books. And also when it comes to books, okay, which book should we read? We basically have, when we're talking about classics, we have ancient classics, we have original sources, some of you know this, and then we have commentaries. And so there's something very different about reading the original source to Plato's Republic. This would be an absolute must for anybody aspiring to this rich life of wisdom. Plato's Republic literally set the world in a new direction with respect to education. This work right here. You could read books, hundreds of books about this book on what it did to Western education. And so I absolutely recommend the Republic. I absolutely recommend a paper version of it. And I wrote down a couple other books. And so I'm going to be inclined toward philosophy, but many of the books, I mean, War and Peace, you can see there. We have Canterbury Tales, Dickens's Bleak House. Here's a real classic, 1984. You see Macbeth. Don Quixote is here. A lot of these are philosophy books up there. But in terms of philosophy, I'm just going to make it really simple. I would recommend the Republic, like I said, absolutely. I would recommend Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, and I will put these in the notes down there so you can look at them for the spelling or whatever. Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics is the treatise on ethics, very applicable to our lives that we live today. And I would also recommend this book right here, which is an encyclopedia. It's not that expensive. It's the Columbia History of Western Philosophy. You could go to Stanford Dictionary of Philosophy online. It's fairly dense, very comprehensive, but I would get this book. You could write in it. It starts with the pre-Socratics in the very beginning and moves all the way through. I think it's written very well. I think it's very accessible. So in terms of philosophy, the Republic, Nicomachean Ethics, and this Columbia History of Western Philosophy, there are thousands of others. I would most certainly make sure that you're reading original sources. So don't just read the commentary on Plato's Republic, and there are going to be countless. I mean, you can Google Plato's Republic and spend a lifetime reading commentaries about this book or purchasing commentaries about this book. I have some there. Read the original source. And then in terms of classics, I mean, there are so many, but I'm going to say Catcher in the Rye, to me, is a very unique kind of work written by J.D. Salinger. There are so many here. I'm going to be leaving some out. But if you haven't read Catcher in the Rye, if you haven't read Orwell's 1984, if you haven't read To Kill a Mockingbird, I definitely recommend right now that you go buy Bradbury's Fahrenheit 451. The degree to which he was prophetic about the information and the technological age, and everything I spoke about today with respect to being distracted, that Bradbury could even come up with where we would be today in the 1950s is unheard of. And Dostoevsky, to me, is, you know, it's a bit deeper. It's kind of philosophical, but very spiritual. This is, you know, a work. It's original sources, but it's a compilation of the Gospel and Dostoevsky. But, you know, here we have the brothers Karmaninov. You know, he has many famous works. Dense, but, you know, the last thing is, like in working out, you don't want to simply work out and not have your heartbeat go up, have your muscles be a little bit sore the next day. So the idea here and here and here and here, here's Catcher in the Rye, by the way, is to stretch yourself. And you're not going to be stretching your mind. You know, it's twofold. You'll be getting wisdom, lots of wisdom, and eternal perspectives, universal truths and perspectives in these works, but also training your mind. So that's my little infomercial on reading, and I will leave some of these titles in the notes. See you later.